Look, I suppose one of the first things to say is I think that it's useful that we have statements on Brexit after we've had Guy Verhofstadt here, we've had the statement from British Prime Minister May on Friday the 22nd, but I do think, Minister, we've got to look at the format of how we do this. I think we've had a Brexit debate now over 2 days, and how we can actually come about as a Dáil with regard to, I think we've got to look, particularly if we go past the next phase, and I'll deal with that in a minute, if we go past phase 1 of the negotiations, that I believe that government should work with opposition and with other parties to have an agreed statement from the Dáil, an agreed motion from the Dáil, reaffirming our position as an Oireachtas. And I don't want that to be a divisive thing. I just think statements are good and this is appropriate. But I think as we get further down the line, that if we get to a stage whereby financial settlement, Ireland and citizens' rights is actually agreed, I think the Dáil and indeed the Seanad, so the Oireachtas, should be looking at a formal statement being made from the Oireachtas, particularly in light of the fact that we have a minority government in place, we have ministers in place, yes, but I think it's important that we do that. Now, I want to just turn to, and I'd be interested in government's view, I know this isn't a Q&A, but it's something that we can address again, that when we look at where the negotiations are right now, one on the financial settlement, 2 on citizens' rights and reciprocal rights between UK and EU citizens, and then the third being Ireland and specifically Northern Ireland. If we're really honest about it, progress has been extremely slow. I think that one of the areas where there has been some positive comment has related to Ireland and the north of Ireland. But I would just caution again, and any time I've spoken on this, that we shouldn't allow Ireland and the north and the island of Ireland to be used as a British Trojan horse when we're dealing when the British are dealing with the European Union. That, you know, what's good for Ireland in the position that Britain has actually put forward is also good for Britain. And if history teaches us anything, that up until recent times and the recent 2 to 3 decades, is that British foreign policy has not been advantageous for Ireland, and it's been about Britain and Britain first and Britain alone. So I would just be cautious about the welcome that we're giving to Britain affirming what they've already affirmed in international law, which is the Good Friday Agreement, firstly because they've signed up to that, they're a co-guarantor, it's a treaty, an international treaty that's lodged with the United Nations. With regard to the Common Travel Area, that again is an agreement between 2 sovereign states that goes back to the foundation of the Free State at the time as well. So they're fundamental pieces. That's not a give. So I don't see that as a give from Britain to say, great, we're doing that. That's a must-have. That's absolute. They can't just unpick that and tear it up and throw it away. So I don't want to be overly negative. Like, there were aspects of the British Prime Minister's speech. Yes, Ireland was central to it. Looking in the reality maybe of a time-limited extension to the 2-year period, a transitionary arrangement, okay, commitment to honouring future financial commitments and obligations. That's actually important because that flies in the face of the go whistle for it strategy that Boris Johnson and others had. So that's a big change, and we recognise that. But whilst we shouldn't be used as a Trojan horse for Britain, we can't also allow ourselves to be used as a battering ram for the EU either. And that's when it actually concerns me when Michel Barnier was here, a particularly hard line that was taken, but also with Guy Verhofstadt, and it was useful. It was useful to have, and particularly the questions and answers element of it. But one, let's remember that Guy Verhofstadt is effectively the representative of the European Parliament. He's not a negotiator. He's not on the negotiating team. So when Verhofstadt says that Ireland should not and will not suffer because of Brexit, I absolutely am with him 100%. They are good words, but that's got to be backed up by deeds. So, but also when Guy Verhofstadt and Michel Barnier and others say it should be up to the British to come up with solutions, I might be okay with that if I thought that they could come up with solutions to this. If I actually thought that it wasn't Boris Johnson and Davis and Prime Minister May and a cabinet that's actually fractured in Britain, that we were going to leave it up to them to come up with solutions. I think the political judgment of the Tory government over successive prime ministers, and particularly the current one, and former Prime Minister Cameron and by foreign secretaries would actually tell me there's no way on earth that we should actually leave it to the British to come up with solutions, particularly relating to a solution to an Irish border, because again history tells us that the British don't really have a fantastic track record in relation to drawing of borders and dealing with international crises. So, not to be facetious about it, I genuinely think that the EU and we have a role in actually coming about and bringing about solutions. It's not acceptable to say, let's leave it to them, leave it to them to come up with the solutions. Look, we've got to remember that when the British talk about free trade and they talk about access to a free market, the irony of that is, and the contradiction of that is, they actually have that already. They actually have access to the largest free trading bloc in the world. They have the highest of standards. Their own British companies export about over €300 billion worth of goods and services into the EU. Do they actually think that they're going to be able to replace that level of trade with Argentina and Brazil and Australia and India and the former colonies and the former far-reaching four corners of the world of the former British Empire? They're not. Nor indeed are we going to be able to simply replace any trade with Britain that's lost. And that's going to be very difficult. So to talk about diversification is fine, but in certain sectors it's not that easy. You know it, Minister, colleagues, you know it as well, that in particular in the agri-food area, in my own area of Dublin Fingal, where there's a large horticultural sector, the value of produce has already dropped in export to England. We've lost nearly €800 million worth in the value of exports in that sector alone, and we're highly exposed in certain sectors. So what I want us to do is, when I questioned and made a point to Guy Verhofstadt and others did as well, is that we've proposed as a party the creation of an EU reform fund, which is a pan-European fund that affected sectors, be they a horticultural sector in Holland or in Poland or indeed in Ireland, can actually access that fund, whilst the sectors that are most heavily at risk and are actually losing business and losing jobs can actually get real support from the EU. And I welcome the fact that Verhofstadt actually said that that's something that would be under active consideration. But what I need you to do, Minister, and your government to do, is to formally request that at the Council of Ministers level and at Commission level. Because if that may have been done since July, and you may be able to inform me of this separately, but when I was in Brussels with my own party team as well, is that we questioned that in May and June as to whether a formal proposal had been put forward. That was questioned as well with the Minister at the time, Mary Mitchell-O'Connor, by way of written parliamentary questions, that had we actually requested of Europe to a relaxation of state aid rules, to look at an EU reform fund to assist businesses. That hadn't happened as of then. If it hasn't, it needs to happen. It needs to happen urgently while the door looks like it's slightly ajar. But it shouldn't be just seen as a dig-out or a helping hand for Ireland alone. There are, in Denmark, in Belgium, in Holland, there are people, particularly in the agricultural sector, who are highly exposed to the British market. And we need to level the playing pitch, because have no doubt right now that in Britain, EU state aid rules are not to the forefront of the British government's mind. I think the Nissan deal in Sunderland was one that has been, that if we were to get details of that, we would see, well, whether that breached state aid rules. So we've got to level the playing pitch. Let's remember as well, as part of this, that whilst the UK is our biggest single market and a very important market, and we need to continue to trade with it, that Ireland is the UK's 5th biggest market. The trade between the two countries is over 60 billion a year. And that's significant, and that's really important. And furthermore, what's significant, and where we haven't got to, and this should have been the area that I would have seen agreement happening much sooner, is the citizens' rights and reciprocal rights of citizens. We will have the largest number of EU citizens living outside of the EU should Brexit happen, which it will, and they're our own fellow citizens in the north of Ireland. But what Britain proposed was a new level and a new grade of citizenship, that someone would actually have to apply for this citizenship. It wasn't reciprocated. The EU has been very clear that British citizens' rights in the European Union would be protected and would be transferred across. But if we can't even agree that fundamental, I think we have to prepare for the worst. Prepare for the worst and not hope for the best, But work for the best, but prepare for the worst.